platform made to connect people dedicated to growing and becoming the version of yourself that you were born to become. I'm sat here today with Dave Owen, the creator and owner of daveowenbasketball.co.uk, one of, if not the biggest basketball databases in all of England. Dave, how you doing today?
Yeah, I'm really good. Thanks for having me on, Alex. I love the intro. That piece about becoming the best version of yourself really kind of speaks to me. Obviously, people know me for basketball, but well-being's sort of become like my kind of 50-50 second passion over the last couple of years. So I'm excited to be able to speak about it on a new platform.
Of course. I mean, we've spoken about it a little bit over the last couple of months, and you've sent me some resources, and I found them personally helpful myself. So I'd like to kind of speak more about them over the next kind of hour and see what we come up with. But first of all, where did the journey of well-being start for you?
Yeah, I think as with a lot of people, it came from trauma, sadly. So my dad passed away in January 2021. That obviously took me from my normal, as I understood it to be at that time, to obviously quite a negative mental space, being traumatized and going through grief. And as a quite logical, pragmatic person, I wanted to just come up with some practical tools and routines and things like that to try and get myself back to my normal. And that's kind of where it all started for me, really. Just, it's a pretty strong motivation when you're put in a situation like that to try and find your way back to your normal.
And so, how did you what was the goal when you were getting started out, trying to define that well-being and define that normal and define what you were trying to actually work towards?
Yeah, I think a lot of people would maybe go down the route, or maybe I should have done, of reading up on these things or watching podcasts or speaking to people. I've always been very kind of self-aware, and kind of I see the patterns of my thoughts and behaviors. I've always kind of learned from them throughout life. And I think I just had the confidence within myself to kind of do that, but a little more intensely, I guess, than I've ever had to before. So I just thought about, what do my days look like normally versus what do my days look like right now? What can I still do? What am I just not in a place to do? What do I need to get myself back to? And it was more down to the real practical aspects of scheduling and time management and that kind of thing. And then understanding all of those activities that I would invest my time into, what was the impact of those activities on my well-being? And that was where it all kind of started, that very kind of logical thing of almost return on investment. Anything you do, people think about it in terms of money, but time and money are almost interchangeable in a way. If you're investing time into something, you have to get something out of it, investment, return on investment. So once I started understanding that from a well-being perspective and actually trying to, as a very kind of analytical spreadsheet kind of person, almost categorizing everything, and okay, when I do that thing, it makes me feel this way. When I do that thing, it makes me feel this way. And just starting to kind of understand all of that, and where maybe I had deficiencies in certain aspects of well-being, where I needed to maximize other areas that really had a positive impact on my well-being.
And so what were the areas that you feel like you kind of had to put more time and effort into as you were kind of trying to put more of an effort into your well-being and mental state at the time?
I think it was very much trial and error in the early stages. You can break down, and it's hard for me speaking now to kind of go back into my old mind frame and understand what I was thinking at that time, I guess, because I've learned so much since then. It's all very clear in my mind now. But I guess at that time it would have been quite focused on splitting my life between, as everyone kind of does, between, I like to call it productivity, because that covers work, but also kind of productive things that you do outside of work, obviously with me, with Dave and basketball, my various other outlets. So productivity, and then social, and then kind of self-care. Those are kind of the three aspects I kind of break life down into. But I think, although I'd always made time for self-care, I maybe didn't fully understand what I needed out of that time. It was more, well, I know I need downtime. I know I need to slow my brain down to sleep. So I'd have like downtime for like an hour before I went to bed, almost begrudgingly, because I wanted to be seeing people or doing something that I felt had a meaning and gave something to the world. It wasn't something I really valued. It was just a thing. I understood I have to do this in order to be able to sleep. And I guess now that kind of self-care time allocation has, first of all, significantly grown. I give a lot more time to it. but also I very, very much understand the activities that I want and need to do within that time to maximize the impact on my well-being.
I mean, I really like the point of downtime, because that's something that I'm really struggling with at the moment. Is like as someone who wants to always stay busy and always feel like I'm making progress, and it sounds like you're much the same as me. It's like you always want to feel like you're making some kind of progress towards something, and you put your work down and you're just like, okay, well now I'm wasting time, and like I've always been told, like, if you're not working hard on something, that someone else is, and it's just like now having to, like, sit down for that hour before bed and try and calm your mind after it's been racing all day. It's really tough for me personally to actually do that willingly and do it intentionally.
I would say that's been the thing that's been come most recently to me. That's what I really struggle with, because I'm extremely fortunate in that pretty much everything I do in my productive time is basketball. I work for Basketball England, then I've got this other outlet of Dave Owen Basketball, then I have another outlet of coaching. So I have three things that speak directly to my passion of helping people, but within the arena that I'm passionate about as well. So I'm extremely fortunate that I don't have, for 12 years, I did have a job that was not basketball. So I know what that life looks like. And I probably appreciate it more so now because I work in basketball. So, all day, every day in terms of productivity, I get to do something I love doing. And it's interesting where we're kind of the same but different. When you're talking about the kind of progress and kind of outworking people, staying ahead of people, for me, it's everything I'm doing is to help people achieve their dreams in basketball, make their basketball experience better for them. So for me, it's very much a kind of giving. And when I think the whole Dave Owen basketball thing is almost a dangerous thing, because it's always there as an opportunity to kind of feed my passion. So if I'm sat on the sofa watching TV, my PC's right there, and I'm thinking, well, this could be an hour for me, which I'm not really getting much out of because I'm just watching TV and feeling like a waste of time. But that hour actually could help potentially get a scholarship or a pro contract just from that hour of time I spent on my PC. So it's quite a difficult, it's a pull. You've been pulled towards that thing. And, it's learning, I guess it's understanding that you can't help anyone. The old saying, you can't help anyone if you don't help yourself. If I'm constantly run down and drained, my output is not going to be as good as it should be. So I think that's what I've learned, that it's not necessarily about the time you put in, it's actually your output within that time. So if you're constantly drained and tired, but I'm putting in 10 hours a day, I'm doing good. It's like, well, you're not, because your output's going to be affected. And particularly what I do, if I get someone's stats wrong, that immediately brings my entire website into question. Well, are any of these stats accurate? So there's a kind of, I really want to be on it with what I do, right? So I think that's what I've learned, that now I find it quite easy to spend that time on myself, because it's almost recharging my battery, like plugging your phone in. So then your phone works how you want it to work and doesn't kind of keep crashing throughout the day.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. I mean, it's something that, like, I've been told that same kind of thing before, but it's really hard to kind of action it. It's like you can be told, like, you need to be intentional in your work, and you need to, it's about what you do and not how much you do and all this stuff. They always say, like, quality over quantity and all these types of things, but there's still a certain level that you can only really get to that level yourself by just understanding yourself and really unlocking that patience within yourself, and that patience of it doesn't have to be done right now. And I think that's something that I'm slowly working my way towards. It is the being able to know that I don't have to. I've been working I've worked on the podcast for 10 hours today. Me working an hour on it before I go to bed isn't going to help me a whole much more. So, like, just trying to do little things here and there. It might feel great in the moment, but it's like you're probably just going to end up, writing something down that you're going to end up deleting tomorrow anyways, or something like that. So I think it's a great point. And it's something that a lot of the people listening to this are from the age of, like, 18 to 25 range. I think more than half the listeners are in that kind of range. and it's something that a lot of young people do struggle with, is that feeling of, you said, the power of now. It's kind of in reverse. And I know that's a book that you read. You said the first chapter of, and it sounds like a great book. But
Yeah, it's
I feel
phenomenal.
like for young people, it's almost like it has to have the opposite of, like, take that time to reset and take that time to, it doesn't have to be done right now, every single time. Does that make sense? But here, look, I wanted to ask you a little bit about also, was there a mindset change you had to have for you to be able to unlock that, if that makes sense, to recognize that it didn't have to be all instantaneous?
Yeah, I think one of the big turning points for me, which came from a friend who read the book and then lent me the book, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And it's the kind of one of the key points to take from it is to become an observer of your thoughts. So, I mean, I can go like pretty much the whole hour just on like controlling your mind and your thoughts and what I like to call my mental hard drive. So I would say I really kind of sorted out all the practical stuff. So all my time management, my budget management, my productivity, all of that stuff was really, really on point, and I was kind of flying. But I could not slow my brain down. I just couldn't stop it. So my sleep was absolutely awful. Like I had weeks where I'd be having 3 hours sleep. And I was going to bed at the correct time. I was having the hour downtime. I was doing all that. But my brain just would not stop going. Because one, I'm super passionate about everything that I do. But two, my day job with Basketball England is based around solutions. So I'm constantly ticking away on that thing that I'm trying to kind of unravel and find the solution to. And obviously when that solution comes, you don't want to lose the value of that thought. And I almost had an anxiety around, well, if I go to sleep and forget this, then I've lost that solution. And obviously you get into like writing it down and doing all that, but you're still writing stuff down at 3 a.m. and it's just not cool. So there were kind of, if you don't mind me going off on a bit of a tangent about this, because it's probably the biggest impact it's had, and there's several strands to it. So I did what kind of everyone does in that situation, started having a lot of notes on my phone, and whenever thoughts came to me, getting them down. So the value was captured in kind of as minimal words as possible. So you're not there writing out whole paragraphs and going all off on a tangent and doing the whole thing, just enough to trigger your memory when you've allocated the time to kind of come back to it. And then once I'd kind of really got organized with how I do my to-do list, I'd separated them all out through all the various things I do, because everything just felt way too jumbled across all the things I do. And there was way too much in my head, and it felt like a heavy, heavy weight that was trying to desperately cling to all of these memories and all of these things I was trying to figure out and kind of work my way through. And once I got them all down and out of my brain, I immediately felt like, okay, it's like a hard drive on a computer. And this is kind of the realization I've come to, that if you think about the way a computer works, and that it always has like a finite amount of hard drive space, right? But there's a certain amount of system data that is needed within to be saved on that hard drive, which is accessed every single time you turn the computer on for the computer to be able to function. Now, beyond that system data, anything else you save on that hard drive is entirely up to you. Whether you want the convenience having it right there so you can access it instantly, or you want to save on the cloud or an external hard drive somewhere else that you can, it's maybe not as convenient, but if you don't need it every day, you can go and get it as and when needed. And that's kind of the way I now approach my brain. There's only so much space in there, and I was finding at 38, I was maxed out. Like, that was just, my memory was so much worse than it used to be. Like, I couldn't remember who I'd spoken to about what in terms of like general social conversations. I was really noticing a change in my memory over the last kind of 5 years, say, and kind of clearing out my mental hard drive, where basically, if I don't need it every day, I'm going to put it somewhere else, and I'll just refer to it as and when I need it. So I'm not storing it as a memory anymore. And I kind of did that. And then I went to another kind of lane of decision making throughout your days as well, but what I call micro decisions. So really small minded decisions. So my example is, let's say there's a meal you cook once a month, and you always cook it once a month, so you know what you need to buy. But when you go to do it, you kind of roughly remember what all the stuff goes in and how long it takes. But it's a bit fuzzy and a bit frustrating that you can't actually remember it spot on. So you still got to go and check the packets and do whatever. And it's a slight irritation because you're solving a problem that you already have solved every month for however long. And it seems kind of dumb. But because it's such a small amount of time, you don't really think about it as something you need to solve. But there's so many of these micro decisions that we have throughout our day. And that little bit of irritation, that little bit of negativity can actually kind of build up on a cumulative effect. So I found any time I was making one of these micro decisions, I couldn't quite remember because it wasn't an everyday thing. Again, I just make notes on my phone. So meals and little micro decisions throughout my day. So again, I'm not reaching for memories that are a bit fuzzy and unclear. They're there somewhere, they're written down when I need them. And I found by tackling those two things, they're kind of similar but different, I just cleared out all of this space in my brain, and I was spending a lot less time in my head with all these thoughts kind of swirling and feeling cloggy and foggy. And I think by doing that, I then had a spell where my brain was kind of hyperactive in the sense of all of these things that I've been trying to solve with work and all of these things that I've been trying to figure out, my goals and objectives for Davo and basketball and all this other stuff in my life. Now, all of that stuff was out of the way. I was having incredible moments of clarity and just bang, 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 solving all these problems, getting the solution down on my phone so it wasn't in my head anymore. And it was just like every day for about 2 weeks, there was just more and more solutions, more things that were almost just a tick, 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 get them out of my brain, they're done now. And it just left me, I mean, it must have been meant to be that I had to do that stuff before a friend would start talking about the power of now and thought management and becoming an observer of your thoughts, because I just didn't have the headspace to even consider that kind of thing. But having cleared out my mental hard drive, as I call it, and not having a lot in there anymore, still a few solutions are not quite solved yet, but not a lot going on in there anymore. Obviously I engage my brain when I need to. When I'm in work mode, I'm going back to my notes and working on stuff. But I'm talking day to day, it's pretty clear and it's pretty kind of peaceful. And then I was led down this road of mindfulness and kind of becoming an observer of your thoughts and reading this book. So what this does is, or what Eckhart Tolle says in the book, is to separate yourself, your you-ness, from your thoughts and your mind, because they're not you. They're things that are kind of offered to you by your brain or your universe, however you want to frame it. And if you can separate yourself from them and watch them and observe them with a kind of calm but intense alertness, so you're very aware, you're in your kind of peaceful frame of mind, and then a thought interrupts, and you've got to have that consciousness of, oh, I've identified that a new thought has now come in and tried to distract me. And you have to first recognize your reaction to that thought. Is it a positive reaction, negative reaction? And then you also got to think about, well, is this a thought that needs to be dealt with right now? Do I need to process it and think it through and whatever? Or is it a thought that I need to maybe write down and come back to? Or is it a thought that I need to kind of almost observe leaving the room and floating out of the room because I actually don't need that in my life or anything like that? So I started trying to get into that. That's still fairly early stages for me because it's been introduced to me and it takes a while to build habits. But I've definitely made a lot of progress on it. And I think once I started doing that, I still had this thing of whenever I had a thought of a solution or something I wanted to do or something I wanted to say to someone, I was still writing it down. And then the same friend kind of said to me, at some point, you're going to have to learn to let go of that thought or that solution or that idea or whatever it is, and trust that your memory will give it you back at the time you need it. And that was like, I didn't trust it because my memory had been so bad for those 5 years, with my brain just being too full and just maxed out. I'd lost that trust in my memory that I thought I would lose anything of value that came to me. So I started with obviously not two important things at first just to test the waters. I started kind of testing that theory out some people are more visual than others. Like, it works for me to actually visualize a thought like it's coming into the room and kind of floating around. And then I don't let it come too close to me. Like, I keep it at a distance, and then I actually kind of watch it go out the window. Or I actually found I would do a weird thing of where I'd actually take it and put it in my imaginary pocket. Because it was almost an action and a visual thing of, that's what I want to keep, but I'm not going to think about it and let it distract me right now.
And you're acting it out as well?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And it wasn't a mindful thing. I was kind of in bed trying to kind of have some guided meditation and stuff, and thinking about what my friend has said about becoming a thought watcher. And the first time I did it and visualized it, I actually just instinctively did that and put it in my pocket, because I want to keep that, because I need that for tomorrow or whenever that thing is needed. And yeah, it wasn't a mindful thing that I did. It just kind of, my body did it. And I was just like, yeah, I kind of, it's a bit weird, but it makes sense in my head that I'm either letting it go or I'm putting it in the pocket for when I need it.
It makes perfect sense. I mean, there's a lot there that I'm really interested in. I mean, the mental hard drive is one thing that I've heard referenced before, by in films, just even like Sherlock, but then even Mo Gaudat, who's one of the smartest people I've ever heard speak. He used to work at Google X, and he was one of the chief people there, and one of the most important people within Google X for a long time. And just like a lot of people have referenced this mental hard drive, but I kind of struggle to understand exactly what it looks like and how it looks like within the person who is trying to action it. So could you kind of just like explain to me how it kind of works?
So the kind of analogy that came to mind when I was doing it was, if you think about your memory, your brain, however you want to picture it, as like a barrel. So with a barrel, you can fill it and get a lot of stuff in there, but you can only ever see and really reach the stuff that's right at the top. So you might kind of remember that you put something in there a long time ago, but it's kind of a real hassle and quite difficult to get to it. And I think that kind of works with the memories, that the stuff that's at the top is obviously A, the most recent stuff, or B, kind of the most significant, relevant stuff. And what was really interesting to me, and I guess this is kind of what a lot of people get from therapy, is once I kind of cleared out all this stuff from the top and was going deeper and deeper and deeper into the barrel and emptying stuff out every day, just clearing it out, I was actually starting to get memories from my childhood that I'd completely forgotten about.
Oh, sorry.
That's right. And also, trauma is a strong word, and I think some people, trauma can be a very, very micro trauma, but I just think of it as anything that affected you that you didn't kind of emotionally know how to deal with. And there were certain things that were coming up from childhood, and I definitely did not have a traumatic childhood. I had a blessed childhood. It was awesome. But we all have those things that happen. And the thing that was really clear to me was the last time I accessed that memory, I was a child and didn't know how to process it emotionally. So it just sat in my barrel, and more and more stuff got piled on top of it. And then at 38, it came to me. And as an adult, you can look at that exact same memory and think, oh, okay, that actually really affects how I've thought or behaved in a certain aspect of my life from that point on. And it's a pretty incredible realization, but it's also equally incredible how easily you can now completely dismiss that experience and change your behavior and thought process almost immediately, because as an adult, you can process it in 30 seconds, because you're an adult and you've experienced a lot since then, and it doesn't seem major whatsoever. It's almost just a kind of, oh, that's kind of interesting that's affected me, but it doesn't need to affect me anymore. And more of these little kind of memories and it literally feels like they're just like slowly drifting up from the bottom of the barrel and just calmly coming into this kind of empty, clear mind that I've got now. And you just kind of, I guess they probably distract me more than any. I'm probably not as good as observing them as new thoughts, because it's more of a kind of insight into my past and who I am. So they do tend to distract me, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And like I say, they don't distract me for very long, because it's quite easy to kind of just pass them on. But I think once you process these things, they're not in your barrel anymore. They're gone, and you've thrown them out. You don't need to note them down or anything. If you work your way through them, which you can do in 30 seconds, then they're just kind of gone forever, and you've maybe made a significant change in your kind of attitude or behaviors or whatever.
I think it's interesting because it's almost like the older memories are the ones that are easier to work through, but they're also the ones that are the ones you don't really want to work through because they're the ones that have been a part of you for longer. You talk about Eckhart Tolle with The Power of Now. I read his book called, I forgot what it was called, but it was about the ego.
Yeah.
I don't know do you know what book I'm talking about?
I don't know the book, but I think he might have broken out The Power of Now into like several other strands.
It was called A New Earth.
Yeah. So I think the egoic mind he mentions a lot within The Power of Now, and he probably broke it out to separate one.
So I read a New Earth by him, and it was just all about the ego, and because these older memories are the ones that might be like easier to work through in theory, they're also the ones that, because they've been attached to you and your sense of self for so long, they're also the ones that are probably going to be a bit harder for you to want to let go of.
Yeah.
And for myself, like I did have traumas in my childhood, so it's like I know that there's parts of it that I still do kind of cling to, and they do kind of define me. As much as I tell people that they don't, I try and not let them. They do. It'd be like, I'm not very trusting as an individual. Like I try to trust people, and I try to always see the best in people, and that's just my natural tendency. But then also I was bullied a lot as a younger kid, and it got to the point where I'm in primary school, and there's 60 boys in the year group, and 40, 50 of them were jumping me almost every single day in primary school, and we're like 10 years old at this time, like that kind of age. So it's kind of very hard to trust people after that point, and I couldn't even talk to people who I didn't already previously know until like 5 years after I left that school. And gradually I'm making it to a point now I just love talking to new people, and like it's much different, and I try and be more trusting. But there's still that part of me that I'm kind of, it's hard to let go of that, because that's also part of my life, and if I don't remember it, then who will? If I don't, if I don't, I don't know, respect and respond to that part of history happening, then no one else is going to ignore it. No one else is going to acknowledge it. So it's hard to kind of work through that kind of stuff. I don't really know where I was going with that, but I just kind of find it really interesting that it's like the easiest stuff that's actually the hardest to let go of.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But yeah, you also talk about organizing your thoughts, and I'm just kind of interested how you go into organizing the mental hard drive and organize everything in a place to where it kind of works for you.
Yeah, I think that's where I just went kind of full geek mode, and like my calendar, and like I have kind of one spreadsheet that's all aspects of my life and stuff like that. And there was just a lot of tweaking and a lot of adjusting and just trying to get that to make sense. And then, having like iPhone notes that I can access on my phone and on my work laptop and then on my personal PC, and then figuring out how to make those notes make sense in terms of all the different aspects that I work within. And most of the 2 years I spent in my wellbeing journey have just been like mostly just faffing around with all of those kind of digital platforms that make sense of my life. And as much as most people would not invest the time and go as in depth, I know myself and I know the way my brain works, and that if all of that feels neat and tidy and clean, then my brain will be kind of as clear as it needs to be in terms of hard drive, but also kind of optimum in terms of like processing speed and stuff like that. And I've just noticed such a incredible difference in terms of how well my brain can process things now, because it's not been slowed down by that kind of overworked hard drive and slowed down processor that it used to be. And even things like being way more thoughtful with the people in my life, because I'm not constantly distracted by my own thoughts and everything that my kind of brain is in all the time. You know, when you are just kind of sat with no thoughts, the thoughts that do drift in are a conversation I had a week ago where someone mentioned something where, like, I like this expression that's quite often kind of used in like UK rap music where they deep something. So you hear something in the moment and you kind of hear it and you recognize it and you understand what's been said. But it's only later when you reflect on it that you deep it in the sense that you understand it. You maybe see it in a different light and understand it on a deeper level. And then you would react to it differently than you maybe did in the moment. And I find that quite often that when you're in a conversation with someone, a lot of information is thrown back and forth and a lot of insights are kind of shared. And a lot of them, majority of them, you will react kind of adequately in the moment. But then sometimes I'll be reflecting on it even a week later. I'm like, oh, actually, maybe what I thought they meant by that wasn't what they meant. Maybe I need to check in on them because I might have picked on something that maybe they're not very happy about in their life and they kind of shared, but they didn't share it particularly overtly, if you know what I mean. And little things like that, or even like little looks and things like that that kind of come back to me. And that just would never happen in the past when, you know, that same moment in my life, I've got swirling thoughts of all my own stuff that's going on. And I think that's something I really like because I think I'm a better friend, son, brother, you know, whatever. So I think that's a really important thing, that when we get out of our own heads, it leaves room to really absorb what is actually happening in our lives on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing as well because one thing I've tried to start doing a lot over the last couple of years, really after I kind of got out of my own depression, I was dealing with depression for basically in and out for about 12 years, starting with what happened in primary school and just kind of continued on and various things happened and whatnot. And freshman year of college is when it got to its worst. And at a certain point, I just kind of said, okay, I'm tired of feeling sorry for myself every day. I'm going to stop doing that. I've been doing it for over a decade and it's just not helped in any type of way. And at a certain point, when you start acknowledging that other people have their own lives, but then also that it's not their job to make you happy. It's the brain's number one function is to help you survive, and you alone. My brain is not built to keep Dave Owen happy. It is built to keep Alex Gager happy and to help me survive, and that's its only function. So when I started realizing that, and when I started to notice that it's not only my responsibility to make myself happy and to keep myself satisfied and all these things, but to also stop relying on anyone else for happiness and anything else, but also recognizing it's not anyone else's job. It's I don't know. It was something that helped me a lot, and I think, like you said, with the planning of the calendar, I think that's something that helped me a lot was just being more intentional in what I was doing as well. My mum had been telling me for years, Alex, you need to start putting things in your calendar, and me just being a kid not listening to her, I just would never do it. And I think maybe a year and a half ago, I started putting everything in the calendar. Every event, the time I was going to eat lunch, the time I was going to go to bed, like everything in the calendar. And from that point, I now know immediately, okay, like I'm doing this at this time, and I'm going to work at this time, and you can now, it does give you that peace of mind of knowing that the work that I need to get done is going to get done, and I don't have to do it right now, like we were saying before. I know.
There's two aspects that I've kind of learned, well, three in fact, from this whole kind of almost obsessive scheduling. Like my Google Calendar is down to the half hour. Like it's every minute thing that I will have to do in the day. And the way it works for me is it removes unnecessary decision making throughout my day. So I can just kind of float peacefully through my day. And by having everything I need to do, or it's not necessarily need to do, it's the way I see it. Like some people see it, they're like, that's just way too fixed. I don't want to be like robotic and have to do and follow it. It's like, well, you don't have to. Like you can still make a decision. But the way I see it is I'm my own sat nav. So I've created the roadmap of what I think is the best version of my day. Like, I think it's the optimized schedule. So it's me telling myself, I think this is what would be best in terms of your decision making in this moment. And my phone goes off every time I'm meant to be doing something, which for me is really, really effective for time management, because I very often get into things that I'm really passionate about. And I'm supposed to finish at 7 o'clock and I don't finish till 8:30. And then I've sacrificed an hour and a half normally of downtime self-care stuff more often than not, because what we need to do and what we have to do and what we want to do, it can get very murky when we're making very rapid decisions over our time. Or we could in fact waste 20 minutes making the decision of what we're going to do for the next half an hour, right? If we procrastinate and can't make our mind up. So for me, I don't see it as, it's not a rigid concrete thing I have to do that and that throughout the day, but it's a very, very useful guide. And some days you actually want to just follow that guide and not make any decisions, because that just might be your mindset of the day. And some days you just go F it and kind of do what you want to do, and that's fine too. But for me, as long as I've got a week where I know, okay, that's the blueprint, that's the kind of optimized plan, and I know that all of those time investments give me the best balance across productivity and social and self-care, and I know my allocations are about right because I spent so long tweaking it and messing with it, I'll still adjust it now and again. But like you say, you still have your own freedom within that. But for me, it makes my life a lot easier to not have to make 25 micro decisions throughout the day of when I start this and when I stop that and whatever. Or should I be doing this? Well, I've already got the plan. Like, if I just want to follow it, I can. If I want to kind of just go rogue, then I can do that too. So I think one aspect of it is definitely the decision-making aspect, and kind of removing a lot of decisions from your day to kind of save you that kind of, because to me, that is really what puts a strain on your kind of mental performance. Decision making is what we kind of do as humans, isn't it? And it's not always instinctive sometimes, and it's not always obvious which way to go. And the more micro decisions we can remove, I feel like you're better equipped and you've got more resource and energy to deal with the bigger, more difficult decisions, or process the bigger, harder solutions, or whatever it is. And I think there was 3 aspects. I can't remember what number 2 was. It might come to me. But I remember one of them was I showed my calendar to some people and got a very negative reaction to it because they thought it was a bit obsessive, a bit OCD, and a bit too robotic. And I think I had to learn that lesson of, well, that's fine. Like, that's fine that you perceive it, that it would be a negative on your life. But it works for me, and it doesn't have to work for you. And I don't actually have to get a positive reception from you for me to know it's the best thing for me. Like, because most people, if they have a negative reaction to it, they're not necessarily thinking, oh, I don't think that's the best thing for you. They're thinking, well, that wouldn't work for me. It's like, well, that's fine, but it doesn't actually affect how well it works for me, or doesn't work for me whatsoever. Now, if someone that I valued their opinion and cared about me, and they actually thought it was an unhealthy way for me to run my life, I'd take that on board and I'd reflect. I wouldn't obviously just scrap it based on their opinion, but if it's someone whose opinion I value and knows me, then I would definitely take it on board and reflect on it. But for the most part, it's just people reacting negatively because it wouldn't work for them. And it's like, well, that's okay. I didn't intend to design it for everyone in the world to follow my schedule or my way of managing my schedule. That's fine.
Right. No. And you said, did you remember the third one as well?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm sure it'll come back in a second. But I just want to say, I'm the same way. Like, when I started putting things in the calendar, didn't always get the best reception in the world. And it's like you said, just having to accept that not everything you do is going to work for everyone. And that's going to be the same when it comes to processing your emotions with certain things. Certain strategies will work for you and not work for someone else. It's going to be the same for getting anything done. Some people are going to need to sit down for 10 hours in a row and just get this work done. Some people can just sit down for 2, but get the same work done, and that's fine. It's like just finding what works for you is really like one of the most beneficial things that you could do, and that comes to anything. And I think that a lot of people do struggle with is that letting other people dictate what they're going to do, and like basically let people tell them that that's not going to work for you, and just be like, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to do it. And it's like, well, you just found a strategy that works for you. Why are you letting Tim decide, oh, this isn't going to work, when you just done process of elimination and decided that it works, and now he's going to tell you it doesn't work, and now you're changing.
Yeah, it's like we're just, as humans, we seek validation for our choices, don't we?
Right.
If you think it right down to when we're first developing as a baby or a toddler, let's say, if a toddler says something and a whole room of people laugh, they say the same thing again, right? They got a positive reception. Now, they probably don't laugh the second time, and they've got to figure that out. And then if they get told off for something, well, in theory, they don't do that again. And a lot of people never really change that mentality. It's like everything they do, they need to get a reaction to it. And, particularly when you think about social media these days and the impact that has on people in terms of that instant validation, or whether it's positive or negative.
Yeah.
And I think it's really challenging to get to that place where you can just be confident that even if everyone you tell about something has a negative response, if you've got the confidence that, okay, what I'm doing is different and not normal, but it works for me and I'm 100% confident in that, then yeah, it's very difficult to get to that place, I think. I don't think it's natural for us as humans, just from the way we develop.
I think that's a great point as well. And I genuinely think that's not something that we ever lose. I think that's something that's like, we're all products of our environment, and whether that be what our parents have told us is right and wrong, or teachers or friends or whatnot, is, we're all. One thing I've noticed, because of with myself, I've lived in 3 countries and lived in 3 states. I've been surrounded by multiple different groups of completely different people in all different scenarios. And one thing I've observed in myself over that time is my accent might not change because I know where I'm from, but I will say different words to make myself more understood to the people that I am speaking to. And I don't feel like that's me just like switching up and me not being myself. I feel like it's just a convenience factor of, I don't want to have to explain what I'm about to say to you 5 different times. So I'm going to say it in the way that you understand it. And that can go to language, that can go to a tone, that can go to saying a word different, since being in America for 3 years, I've had to learn how to say water, like, you have to say certain words differently. It's like, to say things where people can actually understand it.
Yeah.
And that can even go as far as to picking up on little slang words that only your friends say, and that that one friend that always says this word, and you just pick up on saying it, and one day you say it, and one day it it just kind of expands out from there. And I think it's interesting because, going back to the validation point, it's like, I don't feel like we lose that as we grow up. I feel like it's always something that, even an 80-year-old is going to pick up something that their friends say, and it's something that's a great point for our development, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the important thing for me, I don't think we ever lose it, because we're always going to care what people think. But I think for me, and I had it from a pretty young age, actually, even from school age, that I understand which people's opinions I cared about and which I didn't. And I think some people can't really make that separation. Like, any negative reaction from anyone really affects them and can potentially lead them to a different decision. Whereas I look at it as, do I value that person's opinion? And if I don't, then it's completely irrelevant. And particularly if you look at it in the sense of, if you look at that person and be like, well, is that someone that I'm sort of aspiring to be like? Someone who's got their life together from your perception and kind of similar to you and kind of the person you want to be. Well, that's definitely someone that you should kind of bounce ideas off and get their feedback on. But if there's someone who is the polar opposite of the person you're trying to be, then their negative response is actually a positive response, because you're trying to be the opposite of who they are. So what they perceive to be good, you perceive to be bad, and vice versa. So it's almost a compliment, and that's an interesting way to kind of reframe it. But it's very true. Like, if someone that I didn't respect and think was my kind of person responded really positively and thought I was just like them, I'd be kind of offended, right? So I don't want them to validate my behavior and my lifestyle and my choices or anything like that. So particularly thinking about going back to school and getting bullied, which I was, and most of the best people I know were bullied, particularly from males. You know, you got negative reaction from them, but are those people that probably grew up to be the type of people we want to be? Probably not. You know, no one really bullies from a place of happiness. So yeah, it's an interesting take, but I think it's really true that if you can reframe that in your head, that, you know, if it's a random person on the street you don't know and they're giving you some kind of negative reaction in whatever form, you can almost be like, thank you. Like, thank you, you complimented me by not validating that.
Right. I mean, there's I don't know. There's a lot to be said about that, but I think it's a really interesting point of just like letting, you know, they did a study of the most successful people, and they said they had to have something to run towards, something to run from, and then an intrinsic feeling that they would never feel like they were enough. And I feel like having the judgment of people who you both respect and don't respect, and or want to be like and don't want to be like, can feed to both sides of that, of the something to run from and something to run to, because you have that image of, this is what I want to look like, and these are the, and don't get me wrong, no one's perfect, you know, like there was a fantastic book called Resilience, I believe. I think it was Resilience by Eric Greitens, and he talks about your story, and no, sorry, he was talking about role models, and he talks about some of the most famous people in the world and some of the most successful people in their fields. I won't name them just because it's for the podcast's sake, but basically there's some of the most famous people in the world, and, you know, be some of the most famous musicians or artists and whatnot. And it says, this person was amazing at this, but he was also a child molester. Do you really want to be like him, or do you want to just pick this part of his life and say, okay, he did great at that? Do you know what I mean? And it's no one is perfect, and not everyone has their things that they're great at, bad at, good at. You know, it's whatever. But you got to pick it like, this is the part of them that I want to be like, because you're always going to be yourself, and you've got to always kind of pick at bits and pieces from people instead of just saying, I want to be that person as a whole, because that's just not going to work. But yeah. There was a quote by a guy called Alex Hormozy. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's the owner of acquisition.com, and he said, I'm going to bring up the quote, but he said, you don't become confident by shouting affirmations in the mirror, but by having a stack of undeniable proof that you are who you say you are. Outwork yourself out. And for me, that was something where it was like, it wasn't only related to confidence, but it was related to having the ability to not even care what people really thought beyond that point. And I guess that kind of comes back to confidence, but it's just the ability to act without needing that judgment, whether it be good or bad. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Could I screen share on this, because there's a graphic?
Yeah.
I'd love to kind of frame a lot of what I talk about. So hopefully that should come up and look okay on the podcast. So kind of the area you're kind of touching on there on confidence is kind of the bit right in the middle around kind of self-worth. So this was kind of the framework that I kind of worked together to get my kind of practical brain on just connecting every aspect of well-being and how it is a chain. So if we kind of ignore the romance side, because that's just kind of a whole separate conversation, but the kind of goal for me is kind of column N, because it's in spreadsheet form, not a pretty graphic, the positive social energy exchange. So for me, that is when we experience happiness. And I kind of separate happiness as something we feel in a moment. Like, no one's permanently happy. Like, I see happiness as, there's a lot of terminology around well-being. I think they all pretty much mean the same, and it's all semantics, but we all have our preferences. For me, happiness is something we feel in a specific moment, and we enjoy it, and then it goes. whereas kind of contentment is the kind of goal in terms of well-being and your everyday life.
Yeah.
But for me, happiness is felt when we have a positive social energy exchange. So this is why I separate the romantic, because me and you can have a positive social energy exchange, right? It can be completely platonic. It's when, and the key word for me there is exchange. So if we both come to a social interaction with positive energy, then we bounce that off each other, and it's a really uplifting, positive experience. And that's kind of what we will seek as humans. Like, we want to be around other people and we want that uplifting positivity, but it has to be an exchange. Like, if you're a person who's really negative and down all the time, and every time we spend time together, I feel like I have to pull you up, but as often as that, you're going to pull me down, and that's not an exchange. You're what I call an energy vampire. You know, a lot of people use that terminology nowadays. You know, you hang around with me because I'm positive, and you're just stealing my positive energy without ever exchanging anything back, right? So that's what I kind of worked out. That's what happiness looked like for me. Like, that was the goal. And this was in quite the kind of early stages of my journey, when I was on a very kind of practical, get it to make sense in my head, and then work on the habits and the tools and everything like that. But for me, that's what I was aiming for. Because I think a lot of people focus more on the kind of purple romantic thing, like they can't be happy unless they're in a relationship and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, platonic positive connections in life are very, very valuable. Like, the people you have in your life that you just feel good when you're around, like, that's something we should all be aiming for. So then I was like, okay, what do I need to make that happen, basically? So that positive social energy exchange, that needs kind of three things, which is column I. So first of all, you need to generate your own positivity within yourself. Like, don't go and steal it from someone else and then come to an exchange with someone else for it. You have to generate it within yourself. You need a bit of money for kind of self-care and social. You know, a lot of social engagement costs a little bit of money, you know, to do stuff with people and whatever. You need to look after yourself and feel like you look good and you're wearing decent clothes and whatever. That's all part of it. And obviously, the key factor, you need a positive social network. If all the people in your life are negative, and even no matter how hard you work on yourself and your own positivity, you're never going to get that exchange that you seek. So review your positive social network and make sure you've got the right people in your life. And when you meet people in passing, that you get that, however brief it may be, I've really learned to just kind of put myself out there and kind of suggest maybe meeting up and going for a drink and stuff, which I think adults are not great at making friends because they don't really know how to do it beyond a certain age, and it feels kind of weird and awkward. Like, they can ask people out in a romantic sense, but to ask someone out in a platonic sense feels weird. I think more so for men. Like, they don't really know how to make new friends as a man because it's generally a group thing or a kind of legacy thing where you've been friends for a long time. So I've just got really comfortable putting myself out there. If I meet someone who I have positive social energy exchange with, it's very logical to me that I'd want to meet them again, because you can never have too much of that in your life. You never have too many outlets and options and people. So those are the three things you need to go into that positive social energy exchange to basically get your happiness. So then the reason this is a chain, because you're always going one step back. So how do I get from there to there? So in order to get those three things, these predominantly come from what I call rewarding roles. And I use that term because it's not strictly ones that you're paid for. So obviously, like, a parent is a rewarding role. So Dave Owen Basketball is like not for profit. That's very rewarding for me personally. I've kind of framed them into 5 different types. So nurturing is the parent example, where it's a one-to-one kind of direct nurturing relationship where what you invest in that person, you can see the direct result of your kind of influence on them. Yeah. The giving role is like they go in basketball, so it's more of an indirect for multiple people. So I think what I do through my platform and website helps kids get scholarships and opportunities, but I don't necessarily see the kind of tangible evidence of that, because I see people get signed, but I have no idea whether I had any influence in that. It just kind of happens, right? And maybe I was involved, maybe I wasn't, I don't know. So it's just kind of giving just to give, and you know, you don't need that kind of tangible connection or one-to-one. And then also there's job roles that are producing, you know, you produce something and people value what you produce. Performing role, you know, obviously as a performance athlete yourself, you know, when you have a good game or you get some kind of recognition or respect, that all plays into performing. And then I separate performing and competing because I look at competing as that's about winning. Like you have to win as a performance athlete, whereas a performing role is more, and performing role could also be like, singing and dancing and acting and all that kind of aspect of performing as well. It's just kind of being on the stage, on the arena in some sense, and performing well and getting a positive reception from performing well. But then the competing is more the sports aspect, or I guess in other aspects, if you're a rapper, you might want to excel another rapper. It's more the competitive than just you performing to the best of your ability, if that makes sense. I think that's where a lot of what I speak about time investment is. It's like, how many of those roles can you kind of maneuver into your life? So I would say I have a nurturing role because I coach. I have a giving role through David Basketball, a producing role through Basketball England. I don't really have a performing role anymore. Like I play, but I play recreationally. It doesn't really impact how I feel about myself, whether I have a good game or not any days. And I definitely don't have a competing role. I don't really care whether I'm going to pick up game or not.
Fair enough. I mean, that makes perfect sense. And honestly, I think it's really great because I really see that like almost anything that does provide value to your self-worth as a person would fit into one of these 5 categories. I'm trying to think of something and I really can't. So I think it really is all inclusive, and I think it really.
And I think it helps as well that if you are investing your time in a role, by looking at this and saying, well, which category does that fit into? And if it doesn't fit into one of them, is it a role that you should be taking part in? Because if you can't, and this is where it all comes back to, it's like, what is the well-being return on investment for this time or financial investment? So then when we think about rewarding roles, well, to get the return on investment from them, we've actually got to like perform well in those roles, right? So in order to perform well in the roles, then we're dropping into the self-care thing, because we all know that if we're tired and run down and don't feel good about ourselves, obvious examples of performance athlete, basketball player, if you don't sleep well, if you're mentally fried and you maybe don't feel great about your appearance and stuff, you're probably going to have a worse game than if you kind of tick all those boxes, right? It's just logical. And that's no different than me having an office job with Basketball England. If I don't do those things, I'm not going to perform as well in my rewarding role. So the way this chain works just really kind of resonates with me, how everything kind of goes backwards. And then when you come down to it, in order to achieve all of that self-care, well, it's all about self-discipline. And we're talking about our Google calendars now, we're a little obsessive with them. Well, that's our time management. And that's like the starting point of all of this, right? And obviously budget management, time and money, as I mentioned before, are kind of the same thing in many ways. And the piece on the left really illustrates that we as human beings, I'd probably change this to that we have 3 resources now, but we all have 24 hours in a day. Like that is the same for all of us. And a lot of people, if you ask them, write down how many hours you spent on well-being and whatever, self-care, social, productivity, they wouldn't have a clue, because they just have their kind of routine and they go through without thinking about these things. But that's a very finite resource. You can never get more than 24 hours a day. There's never going to be less. So it's very, very important that you allocate the right balance across your life, and that's going to be different for everyone. But I guess the starting point is knowledge of self, though, isn't it? If you don't know what you want from life, then you'd be wasting your time doing all the geekery of spreadsheets and scheduling, because you don't know what your goal is. You don't know what you're trying to actually achieve with that time investment. And then obviously financially is different for everyone's circumstances, but ultimately you can use time to acquire money and you can use money to acquire time. So wherever you are at in life. So for me personally, like I recently made a decision to hire a gardener, which seems very kind of bougie and kind of unnecessary. But I was like, well, that's like in the summer, that's like an hour of my week that I can get back. It's not something I enjoy. It's not a skill set that I can do any better than anyone else. And that hour that I get back, I can use to kind of make progress on my new business, which is the hardest thing that I'm finding to try and find time for. So although it felt a bit like I'm not a rich person, that doesn't seem like a thing I should do, it made sense in where my life is now. I'm not money rich, but I'm richer in money than I am in time, if that makes sense. Like, I'm very time poor through my own choices. I'm spreading myself too thin. I've got a full-time job, I've got my not-for-profit day by basketball, and I've just started a new business. So like, this is my decision. I could be a normal person, just have a full-time job and not do any of that, but that's just me and trying to, it's the rewarding roles. I want more than one. I'm greedy. So I want as much happiness as I can get.
Yeah.
And, my balance is about right, but if I can make little savings like that, it's also identifying there was something on my schedule every week that I didn't want to do. And if you can avoid that, then that's pretty much what you should be aiming for in life when you look at your schedule, that everything on there you want to do. Right. So, yeah, that was kind of a minor little change I made. But I think it illustrates the point quite well that time and money are very kind of closely connected. And, in that instance, I use money to buy time.
Yeah, I think it's great because, I mean, the guy we had on here last week, Christian Backer, he's someone who invests, and I invest too. So we spoke a bit about that, and we spoke a bit about money. And we're kind of touching on something that's similar to what we'd spoken about back then, which was just the value of time and money, and how investing can allow you to have another form of passive income. And I think going back to that point of investing was something that allowing your money to work for you and allow your money to buy you back more time. So, but it doesn't have to be through investing in, stocks or anything else. It could be in real estate. It could be in any kind of passive income. But then by doing that, you're then buying yourself back more time in the long run as well. And that was something we'd spoken about quite a bit. So it's really interesting, and actually it's really great to hear that you are now buying back your time and you are able to do that. Because that's a bit of a position.
There's a correlation with that as well, that the more time I have to actually invest in myself in terms of personal growth, so like reading these books and watching these podcasts, things I never made time for before, I'm growing as a person, and actually now I'm a more valuable employee. So in theory, worth more money because, because of what we're looking at here, when I'm ticking all these boxes, when I'm performing in my rewarding role, I'm at like maximum kind of output because I've optimized all of that blue self-care stuff so that when I turn my work laptop on in the morning, like, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to fly and make the most of all the, knowledge and skill set and characteristics that I have in my role, and kind of work at 100%. So obviously, if you do that on a consistent basis, it doesn't go unnoticed with any employer, or at least you'd hope it wouldn't. So you become more valuable because your output is better. So that's another kind of link where it's like, okay, well, I've allocated some time to my personal growth, and that time in theory could lead to more money from time that I'm already investing in a job role.
I think, it's interesting, and you're also touching on the fact that like we're only as valuable as, or like we're only going to get paid for the value that we bring as a person. And like that's a concept that a lot of people don't really seem to get a lot, especially at my age. Is like your paycheck reflects how valuable you are to the people who you're working for. Like if you're only bringing in, if you're only providing, if your services are only worth 50k to them, they're going to pay you less than 50k. But if you're providing and your value is worth 20 million, don't be surprised if they're paying you 10 million a year. Like it's saying that you don't have to be the smartest and you don't have to be the best at anything to do that. You just have to find something where that skill set is valuable, and then be good enough at it to where you can get paid enough to do what you want to do.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that I've noticed in myself and just from working in different organizations that when you talk about employability, you've almost got, similar to basketball actually, which is obviously a job in itself, and you have an employer and you get paid. So the skill set, and then there's your personal characteristics. So what we have in our brains and within ourselves, our energy, our whatever, the more you work on your well-being and kind of personal growth and develop yourself, I kind of almost see it as a multiplier. So if you've got like a set skill set in basketball and you don't really have particularly strong personal characteristics, you are just your skill set. Yet, if you can develop all of your personal characteristics, it's going to multiply all of those skill sets and make them more effective. And that's the same in basketball as it is in literally any job ever. And I think the one that's always stuck with me to talk about kind of the NBA. So if you think about the NBA, you've got superstars, stars, standouts, then you've got performers, and then you've got contributors. That's kind of the tiers that I think about in any basketball league in the world. And I remember, I can't remember the player, but they're being interviewed and they were saying that if you're a contributor, basically, let's say, I don't know, there's 100 contributors across the NBA. There's like 500 other players in the world that are literally just as good as them in terms of their skill set. But the reason that 100 got the NBA job is because of their personal characteristics. And a lot of that would be down to the fact willing to accept a lesser role. They're probably an amazing teammate. They probably give a lot to the team and they've got positive energy. They probably look after their bodies, so they're always available. You know, all of these things that are nothing to do with what you can do with the ball on the court, but all to do with your mindset and your personal growth and kind of you working on you and being the best version of yourself. That's what separates that 100 guys from the other 500 guys. And I think in terms of its kind of characteristics are interchangeable. But when you think about superstars and stars, they can be an asshole and still get the job because you can't go and replace them because there's just no one else at that level. So they can get away with being severely deficient in their characteristics because their skill set is on a level which makes them irreplaceable. They'll bounce around a lot of teams because no one will want them for very long. But you know, their value of their skill set is so high they can get away with the character flaws. But the further down you go, like, there's no contributor in the NBA who's an asshole. Like, why would you hire that guy who's an asshole when there's 500 guys out there, one of which will probably be a pretty solid soldier and kind of be a good team guy for you? And, you know, it's a great analogy for the NBA because it makes perfect sense and I think people relate to it in the basketball world. But that's the same in anything, right? When you talk about employability, particularly in, you know, obviously not the NBA level, but if you're talking about, you know, a basic admin office job, say for, you know, people who have their first job coming out of uni and stuff like that, then you can teach someone the skill set. If their personal characteristics make them employable, you'll happily teach them how to do the job. But if someone comes in who's already done that job for 5 years, knows how to do it, but they're an asshole, then you're probably not going to hire them because you've got to put up with that person every day having a negative impact on your environment that you work in every day. So, yeah, I think there's such an interesting thing in terms of that time investment in working on yourself is, you know, again, to go back to basketball, the time you spend on the court developing your skill set, what's that percentage split between the time you spend working on you and like your personal characteristics as a human being versus your skill set as a basketball player?
How much do you think someone's personality affects their employability in comparison to just their general skill set, whatever it is in their job role?
Yeah, I think it depends on the environment, like I say, and just how high that skill set is with the NBA. And actually, you know, some people can get away with it. But then, you know, I'm flippantly saying asshole. But of course, one coach's asshole is another coach's, like, best guy because, you know, certain characters clash with certain characters, right? So, you know, it's not that everyone is immediately written off as a complete asshole across an entire league or sport or an entire job market. You know, people connect in different ways. But as a general rule, I think we can all recognize the people that are going to be more employable based on, like I say, you can use personality or characteristics or character or whatever terminology you want to use, but I think we all know what we mean by that.
Yeah. Kind of taking a little detour here because I wanted to get back to like the well-being, and I know that me personally and Christian Barker, who was on the podcast last week, we spoke a lot about physical health and how that helped us a lot when we were both struggling with mental health in our own journeys, and I'm interested to see how much you've experienced with, you know, I know you work a lot around with like basketball and whatnot, and you've played, and I'm interested to see what you think about the role of physical health in well-being
Yeah, I think I'm just trying to think whether I've got it on there anywhere. Yeah, sufficient diet discipline, sufficient exercise discipline. So in that column C. So I'm very aware that I've always, if you want to split like mental, physical, and emotional, there's kind of three areas of well-being that I think most people would probably use that terminology. I certainly do. I know that I've spent most of the last 2 years working on mental and emotional, because obviously I was in a place where my emotional well-being was really challenged. So that became the focus. And it's probably my most least explored areas, because I think physical well-being is not that difficult to kind of understand and know what you should do to have better physical well-being. Like, it's pretty much, you could write it down in 3 bullet points and anyone would understand it, right? It doesn't take a great deal of research and kind of deep diving into yourself and, you know, knowledge of self or anything like that. It's probably the simplest, but I know it's the area I'm most deficient in. I think exercise has always been part of my life because I've always loved playing basketball and still play and will play until the wheels fall off. So I've never had that discipline of exercise because I want to do it, because it's something I enjoy. But if you ask me to go for a run, not a chance, right? You ask me to go to the gym 3 times a week, not a chance. It's just not interested. And I think, it's interesting because I had a spell in my mid-20s when I was in the gym 5 days a week, primarily because of the motivation of optimizing my basketball performance, even at a pickup level, because I was that obsessed with it. But when I reflect on that now as an adult, my life was really empty in my mid-20s. Like, I had a job that I wasn't passionate about. I was single. I didn't have much going on. I didn't really know myself. So basketball was my thing and my identity. And therefore, I went all in and did the whole gym thing. And I was doing the diet as well. They both came as one. I would calorie carrying and protein shaking and, all that stuff that a lot of us in their 20s do. But yeah, like I say, it was for basketball performance. And I look at that now and it's not a priority for me. I know that I'm in decent shape because I always play basketball. I walk. Again, walking is something I enjoy doing. I like getting out and being part of nature. So again, it's not something I have to make myself do and be disciplined. So I guess for me, the exercise one is kind of a cheat code because it comes under the discipline kind of column there. But it's not something that's difficult for me to do. It's just something I do because I enjoy it. But the diet discipline is my biggest ongoing challenge and always has been, because I'm fortunate that I don't put on weight. I've got a metabolism where I'm always slim. Whereas if I looked down and I was overweight, from a personal pride perspective, I would do something about that and I would change my habits and I'd change my discipline. But because I can get away with that, who knows how much longer. I've just turned 39 this week. So my metabolism is probably going to fail at some point. But yeah, the advice I've had on this is someone who's very similar-minded to me, the same friend who's led me down all of this well-being spiritual stuff. She was saying that it had always been kind of last on her list. And we both had the same thing where we know, generically speaking, we need to eat healthier to be healthier, but it's too vague. It's not specific enough. And she started reading into really getting into understanding nutrients and how different foods affect the body on a very kind of scientific level. So she had the knowledge which she then couldn't ignore, because if well, if I do this, it's going to hurt my body in this way. If I do this, it's going to make my body better. You're then armed with the knowledge where it's difficult not to make the right decision, I guess. But that kind of wishy-washy general, you should eat fruit and veg, you'll live longer and be healthier, it just doesn't resonate, does it? Because it's just not specific enough.
Right.
So I know that's the kind of next part of my journey, but it comes back to our old friend time management, where I don't currently allocate any time to researching diet and understanding it better, because I'm still in this kind of mental, emotional well-being thing. I don't feel like I'm done with that yet. It's obviously going to be an ongoing thing for life, I think. I don't think you ever complete it like a video game. But I guess that stuff's more interesting to me than reading about food and diet and nutrients.
Well, that's really interesting, and I get that, because it's like it's like you said with the time management. We just gotta like pick and choose the things that are most interesting to us. But here I'm gonna wrap this up here, and we have a little closing tradition where I like to say, or like to ask the guest if you would like to say something to the listeners, something that you have, it's generally going to be a message that you feel like people don't hear enough. It's the message that you feel like people need to hear that they aren't told often enough. And I'll kind of leave that to you for your interpretation.
Yeah, I think the one for me is that as men, we don't speak about this stuff nearly enough. I mean, you're what, early 20s still, mid 20s?
Yeah,
I
22.
think your generation is far more advanced in that. When I speak to guys in the early 20s about well-being and stuff, it's not a new topic for them. They're more open to it. But I think my generation, and sure as hell generations before me, like mental health is, I guess, was almost like the predecessor of well-being in terms of terminology that became into the mainstream. It just wasn't spoken about, and I just think it's obviously getting way better, but I'm still very mindful that people my age and older of not being caught up in the sweep of it, and I think they still feel attached to what they perceive to be the male identity, that we don't have feelings and emotions, we don't struggle with mental health, we don't cry, we don't get upset, we don't need to talk to people. You know, we have a perception of what it is to be a man that was passed down by our dads and their dads and their dads, and it's become kind of more evolved with every generation. But obviously we still have a lot of generations alive that were not passed on the right messages. So I guess if I'm talking about a message I want to pass on, is that men do have feelings and emotions, and they absolutely have to talk about them, to the point that it's dangerous not to talk about them. Like, it's something that concerns me, and I think the more platforms like this that speak about it, particularly for men, and obviously I'm not saying women don't need just to talk about it just as much, but I think men are more held back by a perception of it's not manly to talk about it, and we just ignore it. And I just think it's dangerous, you know, in terms of male suicide, if you want to go to the most extreme kind of end result of not talking about your feelings or not recognizing your feelings. And I think the messages, there's so much out there in terms of resource. If you feel like you don't know someone within your male circle that you can talk to without being ridiculed or whatever, then okay, watch some podcasts, read some books, you know, you can find an outlet for you to kind of find that within yourself. And then if you get to a comfortable level with it, you'll probably then find you can open up those conversations, deflect any, you know, potential kind of ridicule or whatever. And actually you'll find that within a group of men, the more you start talking about it, the more other people will be like, oh, maybe it's okay for me to talk about it as well. And then the minority would eventually gradually become the majority, because every man does want to talk about this stuff. Like, trust me, if they're given the opportunity and made to feel comfortable, they do have feelings. Like, they absolutely do. They just don't really feel comfortable expressing them or sharing them, or maybe don't know how to communicate them, or maybe don't even understand them.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say, is just like we're not taught how to. We're like, because especially if like a lot of the father figures that most men have, if they even have father figures, won't teach them how to talk about their emotions, because they weren't taught to speak about their emotions by their father, like you were saying. So I think it is a great point, and I think it is something that, you know, what is it? I think it's about 70% of all suicides, and maybe in the USA or UK, I can't remember, but at least 70% are all men. I think the number might even be higher than that. And it's a really, really, there's a depression pandemic, and it's flooding a lot of men in the US and in the UK and just generally in the Western world. And I think it's a great point that you brought up. But do you have anything you want to add to that before we start wrapping this up?
Yeah, my other like really kind of quick and simple message is, one thing I've really noticed culturally is, hey Alex, how are you? Yeah, not bad. You? Yeah, not bad. That's a greeting. At no point did we actually ask how each other were, consider how we are, and then respond to the question. It's a weird social thing that, although we use the word, how are you, okay, we're not actually asking the question, and we're not expecting a response that actually answers the question. Yeah. So when people say that to me, I say, well, do you want the casual formality response, or are you actually asking me how I am? And then they go, oh, I guess I'm asking how you are. And then I give them a more in-depth answer and be like, yeah, I'm in a really blissful state of joy today. Thanks for asking. But I think that's something that people need just socially as a culture. I don't think it's just a British thing, I don't know, but decide if you're actually asking how someone is or you're saying hello, because they're two very, very different things. And one you can do in 5 seconds as you pass someone in the corridor. The second one you can't. You have to actually stop and ask the question and answer it.
Yeah. And it's that time commitment as well. And with the younger people, you'll see a lot of that. I want to do this now, and I'm on the way to do this, and I don't have time to ask you about how your day is because I gotta go do this. And it's just I do get that. And honestly, that was actually it's really funny. I had on my notes that was something I was actually gonna try and talk to you about today, but it didn't come up. But the talking of actually asking how someone is, and yeah, I don't know. It's something that a lot of people you do get the like, hi, how are you, and then just kind of go about your day, and someone will respond to how are you with how are you, and then just keep it moving, and then it's like, okay, no interaction actually just happened there.
Yeah. And what I've got in the habit of asking people is, can you give me a rating 1 to 10 of your well-being today in this moment? Like that's a way better question than how are you.
Right, and that puts them on the spot to really think about how they're doing as well, which they probably would not have had that entire day without that.
Yeah, and it helps them really put a numerical figure on it and be like,
right.
And then it starts them of almost a habit of thinking, I'm a 7 today, or I'm a 4 today. I probably need to work on that. Yeah. It's such a simple, almost childish thing to do, to rank your happiness on a 1 to 10 rating. But it actually really helps kind of frame it. It's a very good question to ask, and a kind of much better exchange, I think, because it forces you to actually put a value on it.
Yeah. But Dave, look, where can the listeners contact you and check out your database and everything? Just give them everywhere they can find you and your work.
Yeah, so daveowenbasketball.co.uk is a website, and then on Twitter I'm Dave Owen B-Ball, and I think I'm Dave Owen B-Ball on Instagram, or Dave Owen Basketball, one of the two. I'm not hard to find.
Okay, awesome. But look, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate your time. This has been a great conversation. Yeah, thanks. But for those of you listening, remember, your growth is limited when you're alone. So feel free to reach out to me on Instagram or Twitter at _growth_net. I hope to hear your thoughts and feedback soon. And until then, grow together.